There is a moment, and perhaps you have felt it yourself, when you sit down at the end of a long day, you open your phone, and within 30 seconds, the entire weight of a world at war lands directly on your chest. A headline. A photograph. A number so large it no longer feels like people, it feels like an abstraction, a statistic floating in the cold digital air. And yet your nervous system does not read it as an abstraction. Your nervous system reads it as danger. Your body does not know the difference between a war 3,000 miles away and a threat standing at your door. The ancient reptilian brain, the one that kept our ancestors alive on the open savanna, receives that signal and begins to flood your blood with cortisol, with adrenaline, with the ancient chemistry of survival. And so you sit there, in your quiet room, in your safe home, with your heart pounding as if the ground beneath you is shaking. This is where we begin tonight. Not in a monastery. Not on a mountaintop. But right here, in the middle of the modern world, in the middle of the noise, in the middle of the fear. To continue healing your body and soul through these ancient teachings, I invite you to join our path by subscribing to this sanctuary. Every week, these teachings are prepared for you as medicine, as a lamp in the long corridor of confusion, and your presence here, your willingness to pause and listen, is itself an act of great courage. Now, let us breathe together for just a moment. Place your hand gently on your sternum, on the center of your chest, and feel the slight warmth there. Notice that your heart is still beating. Notice that right now, in this precise moment, you are breathing. The body is always living in the present. Only the mind travels to the war zones. Only the mind carries the images forward and backward in time. The body stays here. And this distinction, this sacred gap between the thinking mind and the living body, is the first teaching of the monks. The first pillar is this: awareness without absorption. In the deep forests of northern Thailand, there is a monastery where the monks begin each morning by sitting in complete stillness before the sun has risen. The abbot, an elderly teacher with eyes like still water, once told a young student who had come to him in distress after hearing news of a great conflict, he said, "The candle does not become the darkness it illuminates. You can see the suffering of the world. You can hold it with compassion. But you are not required to become it." This is the root difference between awareness and absorption. When we watch the news without this understanding, we do not observe the war. We join it. We are conscripted into it emotionally, neurologically, spiritually, without ever crossing a border. The second pillar is the teaching of anicca, impermanence, and it comes to us not as a cold philosophical concept but as a living, breathing mercy. Every war in human history has ended. Every empire that seemed permanent has dissolved like morning frost. Every tyrant who appeared invincible has returned to dust. When the monk Ajahn Chah was asked how he remained peaceful in the face of great violence in the world, he smiled in that unhurried way of his and said, "Everything arises, everything passes. Nothing that has a beginning is exempt from having an end." And so when we hold the images of destruction in our minds as if they are permanent, as if this is simply how the world now is and always will be, we are in conflict with reality itself. We are insisting on the permanence of something that the entire universe is already moving through toward its ending. To remember impermanence is not to dismiss suffering. It is to carry it without being crushed by it. The third pillar arrives from the teaching on papanka, which is the Pali word for mental proliferation, the mind's relentless tendency to take one image and build an entire architecture of catastrophe around it. You see one headline and the mind immediately begins constructing scenarios. It travels into the future. It imagines the worst possible extensions of what has already happened. It runs projections and simulations and builds elaborate emotional narratives around events that have not yet occurred and may never occur. The monks call this the second arrow. The first arrow is the actual pain, the actual difficult news. But the second arrow, which we shoot into ourselves, is the story we tell about the pain. And the second arrow almost always hurts more than the first. The practice is not to pretend the first arrow does not exist. It is to stop reaching for the second one. When you notice your mind leaving the present moment and beginning to construct future catastrophes, gently, without judgment, the way you would guide a small child away from a dangerous edge, bring yourself back to the breath, back to the body, back to the warmth of your own hand on your own chest. The fourth pillar is equanimity, and I want to speak about this one with great care because equanimity is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in all of Buddhist teaching. People hear equanimity, and they think it means indifference. They think it means becoming cold, becoming detached, becoming the kind of person who does not care about the suffering of others. But this is a profound misreading. True equanimity is not a wall. It is a root system. Think of an enormous old oak tree in a storm. The branches move. They bend dramatically in the wind. The leaves are pulled and twisted, and some of them are torn away entirely. But the roots hold. The tree does not pretend the storm is not happening. The tree moves with the storm. And yet the roots hold. Equanimity is the root system of the soul. It allows you to be fully present to suffering, to feel genuine compassion, to be moved, to grieve, and yet not be uprooted. Without these roots, every strong wind of news takes you with it. The fifth pillar is the practice the Tibetan teachers call tonglen, and it is, in my experience, one of the most powerful antidotes to the particular helplessness that war news creates in us. Tonglen means giving and taking. You breathe in the suffering. You breathe out relief. Now, I know this sounds counterintuitive. We are trained to protect ourselves from darkness, not to breathe it in. But the practice is built on a radical understanding. The darkness you breathe in does not stay as darkness. It moves through the open, spacious awareness of your compassionate heart, and it is transformed. You are not absorbing it. You are metabolizing it. You sit quietly, and you call to mind the face of someone suffering, perhaps someone you have seen in a photograph, perhaps someone whose story you read. And you breathe in, imagining their pain, their fear, their cold, their hunger. And then you breathe out warmth, you breathe out safety, you breathe out the genuine wish that they be free from suffering. You do this not because it will immediately change the geopolitical situation. You do this because it changes you. It transforms your relationship to helplessness. It gives suffering somewhere to go inside you rather than circling endlessly like a trapped animal. The sixth pillar is radical limitation, and the monks practice this with a discipline that the modern world desperately needs. In the Thai forest tradition, there is a teacher who made a simple rule for his students who were struggling with distress from the outside world. He said, "You may know the world is suffering. You are permitted to know this. But you are not permitted to know every detail of every suffering at every hour of every day. There is a difference between being informed and being saturated. There is a difference between compassion and compulsion. Many of us who cannot stop scrolling through images of destruction believe we are being compassionate. We believe that to look away is to be complicit, but we are actually engaged in a kind of unconscious self-punishment. We are flagellating ourselves with images we can do nothing about, and we are calling it moral responsibility. The monks teach radical limitation not as indifference but as stewardship of your own consciousness. Because a person who is saturated, traumatized, and paralyzed by secondary suffering helps no one. A person who has boundaries around their intake of darkness can show up with genuine presence, genuine energy, genuine love for the people directly in front of them. The seventh pillar is the ancient and often overlooked practice of gratitude, but not gratitude as a toxic positivity exercise, not the forced smile and the motivational poster. Gratitude as a serious spiritual act, as a form of honest witnessing. There is a Zen story of a monk who was asked what he experienced during meditation, and he said simply, "When I am cold, I notice I am cold. When I am hungry, I notice I am hungry. When I am warm, I notice I am warm." This noticing without adding narrative, without adding guilt about the warmth when others are cold, without adding resentment about the cold when others are warm, this clean noticing is the foundation of true gratitude. You are alive. You are breathing. There are people in your life who carry some portion of your story. There is food, there is water, there is shelter. And none of this negates the reality of suffering elsewhere. Both things are true simultaneously. The art of spiritual maturity is learning to hold both without letting one erase the other. The eighth pillar is direct, tangible, embodied action, and this teaching comes from the understanding that despair is what happens when compassion has nowhere to go. The helplessness you feel watching war news is real, and it is painful, and it is not a flaw in your character. It is evidence that you care. But caring without a channel becomes poison in the system. Every tradition of wisdom has known this. The Bodhisattva ideal in Mahayana Buddhism is not to sit in perfect peace while the world burns. It is to descend back into the burning world with skillful means, with practical action, with one small candle at a time. You do not have to stop a war. You are not being asked to stop a war. You are being asked to do what is within the circle of your genuine influence. Donate to one organization that is feeding one family. Write one letter. Have one honest conversation. Teach one child something true and good. Plant one tree. The scale of global suffering can make these gestures feel absurd, but the monks understand something the modern mind forgets, which is that the universe does not distinguish between large acts and small acts. It only distinguishes between acts of love and acts of fear. And the ninth pillar, the final teaching for tonight, is perhaps the most intimate and the most revolutionary of all. It is the practice of sitting with your own mortality, what the monks call maranasati, the contemplation of death, but not as a morbid exercise and not as an exercise in fear. As a clarifier. As a lens that burns away everything that is not essential. When we are confronted with images of death, with the deaths of strangers in distant places, the mind immediately tries to manage this confrontation by creating distance. Those are other people. That is another country. That is another religion, another language, another set of circumstances. We build walls of difference to protect ourselves from the raw recognition that sits beneath all the differences, which is this. Those are human beings. And you are a human being. And the body is fragile. And the days are numbered. And this life, whatever else it is temporary. When you allow this recognition to land, really land, something extraordinary happens. The trivial becomes obviously trivial. The essential becomes obviously essential. The argument you were about to have about something that will not matter in 10 years begins to dissolve. The evening you were going to spend on your phone instead of with the person you love begins to feel like a theft of something irreplaceable. Maranasati does not create despair. In the hands of a genuine practice, it creates urgency toward beauty, urgency toward love, urgency toward the things that actually constitute a human life well lived. So let us bring all of this together now, because these 9 pillars are not separate buildings. They are one roof. They are one shelter. Awareness without absorption. The mercy of impermanence. The recognition of mental proliferation. The root system of equanimity. The transformative practice of tonglen. The radical stewardship of limitation. The honest witnessing of gratitude. The channeling of compassion into action. And the clarifying fire of mortality awareness. These are not ideas to be filed away and forgotten. These are practices. They are daily practices. They are morning and evening practices. They are practices you carry with you into the moment you reach for your phone, into the moment the news begins, into the moment the chest tightens and the breath shortens, and the ancient chemistry of fear begins to move through the blood. You are not broken because the suffering of the world affects you. You are, in fact, functioning exactly as a compassionate human being should function. The monks are not numb to the world. The greatest teachers in every tradition were not numb to the world. They simply learned, through long and patient practice, how to be present to the world without being consumed by it. They learned to let the suffering of the world move through them like wine through an open window rather than accumulating inside them like smoke in a sealed room. I want to leave you tonight with one final image. There is an old story from the Zen tradition of a student who comes to the teacher in great anguish. He says, "The world is drowning in violence, and I do not know how to bear it." And the teacher takes him outside, to a small garden. And in the middle of this garden, after weeks of rain, after storms that had torn branches from the old trees and scattered debris across the paths, there is a single small flower growing up through the mud. And the teacher says nothing. He simply points. And the student stands there for a long time, looking at this flower, this impossible, stubborn, unreasonable flower, growing with complete indifference to the chaos around it, producing beauty with no audience and no applause and no guarantee that the next storm would not pull it from the earth entirely. And slowly, the student begins to understand. This is what we are called to be. Not the storm. Not the debris. The flower. Growing anyway. Offering beauty anyway. Rooted in something the storms cannot reach. May your roots hold tonight. May your breath return to its natural rhythm. May you carry the suffering of the world with tenderness rather than terror. And may you remember, always, that the most revolutionary act available to any human being in a world at war is to remain, fully and courageously, at peace.